There we go.
All right, move this down a little bit here. There we go. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thanks for having me here. Thanks for inviting me. This is nice to be here. My name is Shokai Rob Hubbard, and when I'm here, when I've been asked to come, I'll flip that one. There we go.
I'm going to interrupt one more time. It's harder to hear off on these edges. It's easier to hear in the middle. So if you notice it a little bit, if you really not understand what I'm saying, just pick up your chair and walk over there. Fill in a little bit. You can still stay 3 or 6 feet away from everybody. That's fine.
Or raise your hand and I'll try to speak louder. I can try that. Here we go. I've been asked here today to talk about my religion, which is Buddhism. I am a Zen Buddhist. I live in St. Paul. I'm a member of Clouds and Water Zen Center, which is a Soto Zen center that is just west of the capital here in St. Paul. So I've been studying Buddhism for, I think I'm now right around the time that I started studying 30 years ago. Oh, excuse me, yeah, 30 years, that's about right, 30 years. And I first started studying at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center in Minneapolis. And so I really kind of approached it through, my introduction to it was through the Japanese lineage. There is actually 2 Japanese lineages, Soto and Rinzai. And I studied in the Soto Zen lineage. So that's what I have been doing ever since. I will say that I've also done more than one style of Buddhism that I've been studying, because I also studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese priest, and he is based primarily in the Bordeaux region of France. And I lived there for the summer of 2015, where I was a staff member there at Plum Village at his monastery in the south of France. And I've also received kind of a lay ordination, is what we call it, receiving the precepts. I've gotten that in both traditions, both in the Vietnamese tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. I received from him, which was a wonderful honor to have. That was in 2013, and I did this thing and did the Japanese version of it in 2015, which meant I had to sew this thing by hand. All of us had to do it. We did it, and we studied. It was about a 2-year process of study, and then we each had to sew one of these according to a very specific pattern that the historical Buddha himself designed 2,600 years ago. So I had this great fear of sewing, or I would have done it earlier, but I managed to overcome that fear and do that. So what I'd like to talk about a little is a little bit about how I came to it, but more than anything, I'd like to just kind of fill you in on a little Buddhism 101 on the basic teaching of Buddhism that everything else grows out from. And that is called the Four Noble Truths. So I'm going to talk about those a little just to give you an idea about this. So my interest in it began when I was my interest in Buddhism began, I was around the same age most of you are. My brother had studied it a little bit, my oldest brother, in California, and so I was kind of going through a period, well, I'd say a period in my life where I could say I was a spiritual seeker, but I could say that that's really been my whole life. I've been interested in a lot of different religions, a lot of different traditions, and just kind of exploring a variety of things. I settled upon Buddhism as being something that really spoke to me because of its emphasis upon mindfulness. And it really spoke to me when I really discovered that it emphasized trying to live a life as deeply engaged in each moment as possible. To try to live your life as fully as possible each moment that you can. And so that really spoke to me very powerfully that I wanted to explore that. And so that's the direction I went with it. And that's what got me in, and then I really learned a lot more about the teachings. So let me talk about the teachings. The historical Buddha was someone who, some of you may know some of the stories already. His name was Prince Siddhartha. He was a prince in his part of India, and he left behind his life of wealth and privilege and decided to go on a spiritual journey that led him in a lot of different directions. He did things where he went, he was studying with a lot of ascetics who were doing things like not eating for months on end, hardly having any water, things like that. He became quite ill and almost died. But he, in searching around for various things, he realized that what he was really looking for was a way around suffering. He saw old age, he saw sickness, he saw death. And he really wondered, is there a way to not, to move away from this, to not be caught in this cycle of old age, sickness, death, suffering? What to do about suffering? So, I won't give you the whole long story of the Buddha's eventually sitting under a Bodhi tree. That's part of the famous story of him, that he sat for a long time before he had an enlightenment experience. The Buddha was just a normal guy. I mean, granted, he was a wealthy guy, like I said, he was raised in privilege. But he was not any kind of a deity, anything like that. He is not a god. He is just a man. And the term Buddha means he who woke up, the one who woke up. So he had the realization after a long period of meditation, and that he came to a conclusion, or had kind of an epiphany, you could say, about what would be a path away from suffering. And that is what he started to teach. And so that was what he woke up to, was the path away from suffering. So I'm going to talk about it a little. What is the basics of Buddhism? I think it's always good to have a refrigerator magnet that says that. So actually we have a couple of them here that I think distill things really quite well in a lot of ways. The basic teaching of Buddhism that everything else starts out from is the original teaching. It is the first teaching that Shakyamuni Buddha did 2,600 years ago to just a select few people, but his following grew and grew. And it all started with the Four Noble Truths. Now I'm going to give you the formal words, the formal, first of all, translation of what from this book called The Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths, as he put them, are the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. What does that mean? Well, in layperson's terms, the first noble truth means things happen that we don't like. Seems elementary, I know, but that's pretty much basically what it is. 2, we are unhappy because we try to hang on to what we like and push away what we don't like. The third, we don't have to get upset when things aren't the way that we want them to be. Instead, we can be peaceful. And fourth, there's a way to live that we can be more peaceful, loving, and happy. The Noble Eightfold Path. Now, that's just like Buddhism right there. To have a fourth one be, now wait a minute, what's the Eightfold Path? It's like in Buddhism all the time, they have these things where you open up a box and you find 8 other boxes inside. It's that sort of thing. Oh wait, there's a lot of other things. And then they have all of these numbered lists for a lot of things. And the reason they have a lot of numbered lists so you can remember things like that is because there was no written record being passed down. It was really all oral tradition that was being passed around down there for centuries. So the way people did it was they memorized by numbers, did things like that. So let me talk a little about these Four Noble Truths. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the Noble Eightfold Path too. And I'll get into that at that point when we reach that. And then really, I would love as many questions as anyone has. I'd love to have discussion about this and answer any questions that you may have. If things come up as we go, please go ahead and raise your hand. I'd be happy to answer any questions as we go. But I really want to save time for that too. So, talking about the first Noble Truth. The way I look at the Noble Truths, it kind of sounds like a weighty thing to say, the truth. There's a lot of different weighty things with, that there's striving for the truth, and what is the truth? In the case of the noble truths in Buddhism, I think of them as tools. They're tools that can help you live a happier life, to be able to move beyond suffering that's in your life, or not get caught up in suffering in your life, not get ensnared by it. So I think that's really what it's about, is finding a way to help you become a happier person. So that might sound light, but I don't think it is. I think it's actually a very important thing. There's a lot of unhappiness, and so this is a way that discusses tools that you can use that could make you a happier person. So the thing I've learned from things that happen that we don't like, the first noble truth, I put it as my suffering there is suffering. First of all, it's that. It's not just my suffering, it is that kind of come to terms with the idea that there is suffering in this world. There is pain in this world. There's a lot over the last, certainly over the last 2 years, that has really refocused this for me. And I think for a lot of us who have gone through things during the pandemic and other things, and a lot of things that we're having a lot of, shall we say, a lot of enlightenment experiences that people are having about white privilege, about our place in the world as where we are. And so I think that there's a lot of valuable things. But one of the things that I think about from my case, my suffering is my responsibility. That's one of the lessons that the Buddha taught me. That basically I can say that person is causing suffering for me, but really in the end, it's how I react to it. And how I decide whether I want to suffer or not because of the actions of someone else. There will always be suffering. It's my choice how I react to it. The second one being we are unhappy because we try to hang on to what we like and push away from what we don't like. This is about attachment. And I was in an interesting conversation with some friends, sitting around and gathering with a few of us, and a friend said, if you could distill what the world's problems into one word, which is a very silly question in a lot of ways, but what would it be? And so everyone around the table said one word, and my one word was attachment. That I believe that attachment is the thing that causes suffering, and this is really a basic Buddhist principle, as I said, the second noble truth. Clinging to a wish that things were different than they are. Clinging to desire for things like wanting to be liked, accepted, understood. Attaching to fear, to anger about something that happened to me in my life. And asking these questions of myself. Am I attached to getting something or getting rid of something? Where do I have attachment in my life that is causing suffering for me? So then, the next noble truth is the third. We don't have to get upset when things aren't the way that we want them to be. Instead, we can be peaceful. Now, this is the hard one. This is one that really, for me, sometimes I read literature about the third noble truth, and boy, it can really get complicated. It can get very difficult about exactly what is this path, about being at peace with suffering. So I thought, for me, a good starting point might be the recognition of impermanence. All things go away. For some people, that is not very comforting. You can look at it as, well, that doesn't sound, it doesn't have a calming effect for me to say that everything goes away, everything ends. But in some ways, it's a constant that there is, and it's very useful. I found it very useful for basically, if I'm really dealing with, say, I've had things in my life, I've had anxiety, I've had depression, had some difficult times in my life, and it's really helped me to be able to say, this will go away. This will pass. I need to be patient with this. So that's a lot of what this is about. And a word I say, here's a phrase that the Buddha used in English translation. All that is subject to arising is subject to ceasing. So, I think a word that's not often used in Buddhism is the word forgiveness, whereas it is used a lot in Christianity. And I think that that's an important part of finding peace, of finding this peace, of this becoming peaceful with being at peace with suffering. And so that I think it's important to finding peace. All humans are flawed. They all make mistakes. And if I'm attaching to how I've been treated by others, that equals suffering. That will bring about suffering. So I think that it helps to examine what you're choosing to carry around and what would setting it down look like. And then the fourth one, then we open up that fourth box and find 8 more boxes inside. That one is the way to live that can be more peaceful, loving, and happy, the Noble Eightfold Path. Let me run through the Noble Eightfold Path really quickly here. And they each have the word right in them, which can be a little daunting. That can sound like very restrictive. It kind of has that, do this is the right way of doing it. But every teacher that I've ever worked with, every monk or priest that I've ever discussed this with, always says, this is about aspiring toward something. This is not about being punitive and restrictive. It's about seeking to go in this direction in your life. So, here is the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, seeing the big picture, that we're all connected. Understanding the Four Noble Truths. Right intention, wanting to do the best thing in all situations, being respectful of all beings. Right speech, speaking the truth in a kind and helpful way. Be honest with yourself and others. Listen for the truth of others. Right action, acting skillfully from the loving part of ourselves. Protect life, be generous, honor the body, avoid things that cloud the mind. 5, right livelihood, taking care of other beings and our earth at work, home, school, and play. 6, right effort, following the Eightfold Path with diligence and enthusiasm. 7, right mindfulness, paying attention to what we think and feel. And 8, right concentration, meditating regularly to grow the place within us that can be present and love everybody, including ourselves. Now, those for me, there's a lot there to unpack, and there's things that people study for years about these things. But I'm going to kind of just talk a little about where I started on this path, and that was with mindfulness. And I've really found it very, rewarding isn't necessarily the right word. Because Buddhism doesn't really say that you should try to attain a reward. It really seems kind of odd when there's things about this enlightenment experience that the Buddha has, and that people speak of seeking enlightenment. It's not really a path that encourages seeking, grasping, or, again, attaching to things. It's about not attaching to things. Now, I think of it as when you say things like, be at peace with what is, be at peace with suffering. That's a tricky one, because that sounds like, are you saying don't try to affect change in this world? This world that so desperately needs changing in so many ways, that needs to be reshaped in so many ways? That's not what Buddhism advocates. It's very much about right action, right livelihood. It's very much about affecting change where you can. Because what is the compassionate thing for you to do for others? Well, that's going to involve affecting a lot of change, so you have to do it. But it's about don't attach to outcomes. Try not to, endeavor not to be too attached to how things are going to come out. They probably aren't going to come out exactly like you want them to when you're the change that you're trying to affect. They won't. It probably won't be. But don't feel that it needed to be that. Be with what it has become. Work for a change, but be peaceful with what it is become. It's also among those is taking responsibility for what you do in your life. So that's a lot of what this is about. It's not about sitting back and being a spectator. It's very much about being very active in life. Now about meditation. I am not the best meditator in the world. I've never really been as good as a lot of people I know who can do things like sit for long periods of time. We do things called sessions, which are intensive meditation retreats that a lot of us practitioners, that's what we call ourselves, who practice Buddhism, do together, where there are extended periods of sitting meditation. Soto Zen tradition and Japanese tradition really emphasizes meditation a lot. Vietnamese, a little less so, but still they have a fair amount of it. And there are other ones that are there are some sects of Buddhism that it is really, they really do a lot of sitting. There are legends of monks who sat for months on end, and so it's something that is good though as a tool to slow down your mind and to be able to concentrate on these things, to be able to slow down, focus on what's going on in your mind. Thinking those aversions and attractions are going to come up in your mind, what you like, what you don't like, how you wish things were different. Those things have come up a lot, but they're always going to come to your mind. Through meditation, it's useful. Meditation is useful for being able to slow that process down, quiet your mind, be able to focus more on those things, on what, basically looking for clarity, looking at things with more wisdom and clarity. So it's very valuable for that. And I've had conversations with my son, who has been practicing Buddhism for pretty much his whole life. And when somebody said, sometimes it takes me about a half an hour to get my mind to settle down when I start meditating. And my son said, it takes me a week. This is really a lot of it. And I can really relate to that. I have a very busy mind. A lot of things going on in my mind all the time. And so I'm always multitasking up there all the time. So it is very hard for me to quiet down. But I find that it's a very valuable tool. And I find these all very valuable tools to use. I found it for my life, it's helped a great deal. Excuse me, let me take a drink here. Good. That was about a half an hour. That's about exactly what I planned. And I would love to talk more about it and answer any questions that you have about Buddhism. And I'll do my best. I'm not a scholar of Buddhism. I am just a practitioner who's been doing it for about 30 years. I am very involved in my Zen Center, and I've studied in a couple of different places, but there are experts, but I will do my best to answer any questions that you may have about it.
What questions do you have? Yes.
You said a lot about like suffering, but also like mindfulness. Which one would you say like describes Buddhism?
I didn't quite understand.
questions about suffering or mindfulness. Those were the two main focus that she heard.
Okay.
And you're wondering, so which of those would you say is like more central to what you experience?
I would say that to what I experience is one thing. To what the basis of the teaching is, the first noble truth is that there is suffering. And so I would say the Buddhist teaching is basically rooted in the idea of accepting that there is suffering in the world. And one of the things about it is kind of getting away from the idea that it's my suffering and that it's really everyone's suffering. Everyone has suffering in their lives. And so that, I would say, is a larger focus. Mindfulness for me, I would say, is a path into it for me personally. The desire to, and desire is a bad word too, it's wanting to travel the path toward being more mindful is very important. But I would say for Buddhism, the basics of the religion, he made that the first noble truth for a reason. That it is, you have to recognize that there is suffering in the world. And it's valuable to remember, keep mindful of the brevity of life, that there will be suffering, that each individual has the capacity will grow old, will get sick, and will die. So that's something that is kind of meant to be mindful of that. So in that way, they kind of work together, being mindful of suffering. So I hope that helps. Is there another question? Yes.
Yeah, I would have a question in regards to the Christianity we worship together, and that involves reading the Bible and our conversations about the theology of Christianity and Lutheranism, and how does that compare with what you study, or do you come together as practitioners, and when does that happen, and how do those studies kind of compare with each other?
I would say the structure, the question about what does it look like? What is this type of gathering? We do, at our Zen Center on Sunday mornings, we have a program that is at 9 a.m. every Sunday. That is our main gathering of our Sangha, which is basically the Buddhist word for a congregation. And we have, what we do there is at 9 a.m., we do a half an hour of sitting, 2 15-minute sitting meditation periods. You can sit on a cushion or you can sit in a chair. And that's for a half an hour, and then one of our teachers gives a talk. Sometimes it's a guest teacher. We do have a guiding teacher, so San Teresa Flynn, and we have, I'd say, about 5 or 6 other teachers who teach pretty regularly. So they give a Dharma talk. Now a Dharma talk is very similar to a sermon. That's that same sort of thing. It is about talking about the teachings of the Buddha, the literature, and there is voluminous literature. There is a lot of Buddhist literature, libraries and libraries of it. And a lot of people have written about Buddhist teachings over the years. And so a lot of them will focus on that, but it's very much focused on how to have it in your own life. What tools the teachings have for our own lives. So there's that. There is early morning meditation we do 4 days a week at 6:30 a.m. We are on both Zoom and live as we've transitioned back. We are now live, and I'd say about half people on Zoom, or maybe a third of people on Zoom, and 2/3 of them live. We do that at 6:30 a.m. We do 4 days a week of noon meditation for a half an hour, and we have classes. There are classes that right now we've really gotten into the fall, and they're studying different Buddhist literature, books that are about things. There's a class on the Four Noble Truths that is just starting up this week. And there's other ones as well. Some of it is about the history of Buddhism. Some of them are about just various writings that folks have done by various teachers. The founder of our branch of Buddhism was a Japanese monk in the 1100s named Dogen. And his writings. There's teachings on his as well. So it's a lot of that. So I think it's probably structurally not that different from what you do here.
Is there music or liturgy you sing?
We chant. We don't do singing. I wish there were more musical things. We've talked about that over the years, especially since we have a number of musicians who are members of our Sangha. We've talked about other ways of working music into things, but in the tradition that we have, that mostly involves bells and drums and things but it's mostly aligned with the chanting that we will be doing. So, and there's chants, there are traditional chants that we do before the talk. There are chants that we do at the beginning and ending of things, so there's some very traditional ones that we do there. And for different ceremonies and things, we just had an ordination of a new priest on Saturday, and that was beautiful, and that had a lot of chants. So, a lot of chanting that we did.
And is it, when you're chanting, is there like an ancient book of chants that you're singing from or you're chanting from? Is there like,
Yeah.
a song or something like that?
Mhm. Yes, it is, I would say, adapted from, a lot of it is very much based in very old stuff. And yes, we have a chant book. I would say, put it as, unlike some that have sort of a hierarchy that dictates a specific, group of chants or things like that would be used, or maybe hymns and things like that. We have one that's really very collection of very old things that we put together. But yes, they're very much old traditional chants. But I would say, I guess that was my way of saying, it's kind of up to each Zen Center to do that. Even though there are organizations that do some overseeing things. Our guiding teacher, Sosan Teresa Flynn, is the president of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association of North America. Correct. She's doing that. So there are people who kind of do oversee how things are taught, but it's not anything restrictive. You're really kind of on your own as far as what. Yeah. No hard fast rules. So, other questions?
What got you started in Buddhism?
Pardon me?
What got you interested in Buddhism?
What got me interested? Well, when my brother got back from California, where he was studying at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, he studied with some folks who were involved in the San Francisco Zen Center. The San Francisco Zen Center was really kind of the place where Japanese Buddhism started in America. And when he came back, he and I talked about it a lot, and I really found it very interesting. And really, again, it was about the mindfulness